Hello and welcome, everyone, to Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition. I remain Clayton Becker.
And I'm still Megan Cox.
And today we're going to be talking about, hopefully not too controversial a topic, but certainly a little more controversial than I think our first two episodes, which is reject helicopter parenting and embrace adolescent independence.
Yes.
Basically, the conceit of this episode is gotta let the kids be kids, right? There's a lot of things that we're currently doing with regards to parenting and parenting styles, parenting trends that quite frankly are just not good for kids, not good for their long-term success. And well, as you might have surmised from the title, we should just reject.
Just reject them. But before we get there, let's talk about the things that we're doing right. Because I think it's important to give our parent listeners in the audience their credit where credit is due. Kids die less, which is awesome.
Yes, there are a number of ways in which we should continue to embrace modernity here, right? I don't know how many parents are listening to our podcast. I'm not sure of
my mother. So.
Okay.
My mom, your mom, maybe that's it.
I don't know if my mom has listened to our podcast, but okay, so at least one parent. Okay, so that's enough for us to make our disclaimer here, which is really that like kids largely are safer than they have ever been, right? Mm-hmm. They die less in all sorts of ways, right? Less in accidents, less in car crashes, less in like accidental poisonings, like you name it, basically.
Yeah. Car seats are great. Child walks on bleach, amazing. Love it.
Yes, all of these are things that are positive developments of the last half century or so. And we should endeavor to protect kids from actual dangers, right?
Yes,
things that are actually harmful to them.
But we think maybe we might be misperceiving some dangers as a society and then taking actions to mitigate those dangers that then themselves had negative consequences. That's where you're going with this, right, Clayton?
Yes, that's where we're going with this. There are many dangers that are, for lack of better terms, quite simply just a little bit imagined or a little bit overblown. And the fact that lots and lots of parents seem to have decided that their children have to be protected just as a rule from any discomfort, any danger, no matter how minor, is doing children a disservice in the long run. And so in order to understand that, let's first take a little bit of time to talk about sort of the main types of helicopter parents. Psychology is not really our area, but in the research for this episode, I discovered, shall I say, that psychologists tend to describe helicopter parents as falling into three particular categories. The first of these is your sort of classic overprotective parents. These parents sort of view the world as unsafe, unpredictable, inherently scary. And so they do everything possible to protect their children instead of preparing them to learn how to handle life's challenges themselves. They are also known in the parlance as lawnmower parents, people who aren't just sort of around protecting their children from dangers, but actively getting rid of any obstacle that they might face. The second of these, and I don't like to use this term because of sort of the cultural pieces that are behind it, but people will know what I mean when I say it, and so I'm going to use it for the sake of the audience's understanding, is the tiger parent. The tiger parent is a parent who provides very clear, fierce, explicit direction to their children, telling them exactly how things ought to be done. And they think that they know exactly how it is best for their child to achieve success in the world.
Yeah. And this type, I think we can talk a little bit about where the fear may be coming from here, because these are all fear responses. That overprotective parent, we understand that's a misperception of things like stranger danger, etc. Again, I also hate it, but tiger parent, with air quotes around it, a tiger parent might be responding to economic anxiety or a sense of economic threat, and they are trying to maximize their child's potential to protect themselves in the future. Through financial security, which
we talked about in the last episode. Absolutely,
yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so the sort of the negative result that happens here is the tiger parent. We got to come up with a better way of describing the
culturally neutral term.
Yes, culturally neutral term.
Guys, email us in if you have any possible options.
The director parent, shall we say? The director parents. The end result of this is that children aren't able to make independent decisions, right? And so they lack the ability to make those independent decisions as adults, even when you might think that sort of the proper way forward, or at least a proper way forward, should be self-evident. Yes. All right, so that's the first two. And the third one we can call the sort of excessive hand-holding parent. This is similar to those lawnmower parents, but rather than just trying to get rid of every single obstacle, you do everything for your child, everything at all, right? You're sort of their personal butler, right? Then this continues no matter sort of how old they get, right? Like, sure, when a child is 4, 5, 6 years old, you often do need to do everything for them, right? But as they age into early adolescence, there are some things they should be able to start doing for themselves, deciding when they're going to go hang out with their friends, staying after school, making appointments for themselves. But the handholder parents don't do this. Yes. You are their concierge, chauffeur, handler, scheduler, and secretary all the way up through their late adolescence.
And not only does this inhibit a child's ability to develop the skills to schedule themselves, to drive themselves, to manage their own social calendar, to manage their appointments, etc., it also inhibits a child's ability to decenter themselves from a situation or develop empathy. A child who is raised like this, it may seem like the path of least resistance or the path to giving a child the most comfortable childhood possible, but that inhibits that adult's ability to relate to others in the future, where they aren't really prioritizing or taking the needs of others into account when setting up their life. And that inhibits the ability to develop partnerships.
Yeah, because like their needs have always been catered to. They've never had to put themselves second, or never had someone put their own needs first. And so they don't recognize it when it happens in their sort of quote unquote real life. Yes. So with that in mind, let's take everyone through just sort of what the research broadly suggests about all three of these types of helicopter parenting styles and the long-term consequences that can result from them. For those of you who caught our trailer, which catch the trailer, we were proud of it. This is the part where we do our highly researched, evidence-backed complaining.
Yes. I don't know if we're throwing links in the show notes. Is that something we're doing? But we
I could put links in the show notes.
I really want to read the citations for this.
Yeah.
Clayton worked very hard on, like getting all the PubMed citations together here.
Yeah, I mean, hey, all I can say here is, like, at heart, I am a high school debate bro, and I need my sources available. So when someone tries to call me on it, I can tell you, actually, here are the 5 citations that prove what I said.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that in mind, with that little bit of Clayton lore in the background, here are the sort of broad contours of that research. There is a growing body of literature here which suggests that kids who have helicopter parents are more likely to develop symptoms of anxiety and depression, suffer from more emotional regulation issues, have lower self-esteem, and more social anxiety. They have a harder time dealing with unfamiliar or uncomfortable social situations. They also seem to be more likely to have poor relationships with their parents as adults, have low tolerance for frustration, and have less confidence in their own abilities and their ability to manage uncomfortable and unfamiliar situations. And last but not least, this kind of helicopter parenting style is strongly associated with poorer academic performance later in life, particularly, as Megan and I can sometimes see, at university. And don't get me wrong, so again, little bit of backup. For those who aren't aware, Megan and I are university level instructors. We teach undergrads. We are TAs. We are responsible for basically, I'm responsible for 60 kids this quarter. I don't know if Megan has been bought out this quarter. I don't know if she's teaching
this quarter, but in the past, that's been about my workload. I've usually had about 30 kids a quarter. And then over the summer, I taught a class without any other instructor for about 25 students.
Yeah, and don't get us wrong here. Like, we enjoy our students.
Oh my God, love
right?
It. Like, favorite part of the job.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy teaching, right? Which is, I've been told, something I'm not supposed to enjoy that much. But it's very easy to tell when you have a student who is experiencing sort of their first academic disappointment, who has not been allowed to fail, who has not been allowed to make their own choices here, and come up with sort of healthy habits for coping with it. Yes. It's very clear when you have a student who has had that sort of helicopter parent upbringing, and now that they have arrived at university, are struggling to make the transition from high school, where their parents still could help them with stuff, and college, where their parents really can't.
Yeah, absolutely. I will add to that I was not prepared. And this is not to speak to our institution or to any institution. I just think I didn't realize the amount of emotional support that I would be providing as a TA or as an instructor to students as they kind of learn to navigate that emotional regulation for the first time.
Yeah. And I will also say I've had more than one student who has had their parents email me, the TA, to explain why they aren't at a given section. Or
I have not had that. Right? I was so uncomfortable. I had to ask a student's mother to email me to provide the mother's medical information as kind of a this is why my student was absent sort of situation. I was so deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation.
But this sort of thing, I'm technically you're not even supposed to know that I am your student's teacher, right? Mm-hmm. I am legally not allowed to even confirm that I am your student's instructor, right? But the students have given their parents my email address because they don't know how to do the scheduling, these skills we talked about earlier, on their own, and so it causes this whole mess for everyone, right? And so I think maybe at this point is where we sort of move to why this is actually the case, right? We've talked about all this research. We've talked about why this sense of self doesn't develop, how it limits people's ability to develop these skills, these mental health conditions.
What is the underlying mechanism?
What's the underlying mechanism? The research here largely suggests that basically the problem is we are not letting children experience and overcome adversity on their own. The kinds of minor challenges, the relatively low stakes adversity that children face at a young age, and let's be totally honest with ourselves. Failing a multiplication exam at 8 years old is not going to set your child up for a life of failure, right? Having them not make the soccer team at 13 feels like it's sort of the end of the world, but it is not, in fact, the end of the world, right? And so, the basic idea here is that these kinds of minor challenges act sort of like a vaccine, right? They act like a vaccine against trauma. Being stressed out by a difficult math assignment at 10 years old, knowing what that's sort of like, knowing what it's like to experience. A little bit of a digression here. Megan's dog is freaking the heck out. I don't know if you guys can hear this on her end. She's gonna step away from the mic for a second, and I will continue to monologue at you.
Go, solve whatever's going on, but you continue.
I will continue. It's a bit like a vaccine against trauma, as I was saying. Knowing what it feels like to have gotten through that, to having not made the soccer team, knowing what it feels like to have failed that math exam at age 8. All of that really does help you cope and get through the stress of actually sort of more important things that you are going to face later in life. It really does help with college applications at age 17, job applications at age 22, or even that crazy busy time when you're going through burnout at work at age 30. Right? It helps with all of these things. But right now, we are just sort of fundamentally robbing our children of the opportunity to inoculate themselves, to take advantage of that vaccine against trauma in order to allow them to succeed as independent adults in the future.
Absolutely. I imagine I agree with everything you just said.
That's true, Megan.
Do you want to talk about examples? I think you've come up with several great ones, but I am so lucky that my parents facilitated me competing in figure skating as a child. I don't know if you're aware of this, but this is Megan lore. I was a competitive figure skater. I was not good.
She's a competitive figure skater in Oregon. Is it Tanya Harding, right?
Oh, yeah. Actually, my coach's name was Tanya, not that Tanya, but we all skated at the same rink as Tanya Harding. Anyway, good stuff.
Oh, for those who are younger than Megan, once again, bringing our running bit back here, Tanya Harding was an Olympic level figure skater who had her boyfriend kneecap an opponent, basically, right?
Ex-husband, but yeah, basically, yeah. It was. I have many thoughts. Maybe for bonus content.
Maybe for bonus content. Okay. But yeah, I mean, like, I think I was pretty lucky in this respect as well, right? Mm-hmm. Like, my parents weren't free range parents at all, right? Like, they absolutely cared and they protected me from truly dangerous things, but they let me make small mistakes all the time. And in particular, they let me sort of self-direct towards the things that I wanted to do and the things that I was interested in. Mm-hmm. Like, as far as I can remember, at 5 years old, I was the one who was like, I want to go and play soccer, right? I was the one who told them, like, I want to do community theater groups. I was the one who told them, like, the things that I was interested in. And for the most part, they didn't force me into sort of any sort of like cultivated pursuits, right? Mm-hmm. And through these experiences, I was able to have the experience of not getting a lead role in the theater production.
Oh my God, yes. Is it not getting cast like the absolute core experience?
The absolute core experience of every theater kid, right?
Yeah, it's like, all right. Yes.
Or like have the experience of like being scared when I thought that I'd hurt myself while I was playing soccer, right? Mm-hmm. And so now if I ever feel like I've injured myself, I'm not like totally experiencing that for the first time, right? I got to experience it as a child and it worked as a vaccine, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. I think perhaps like one of the best examples of this is when I ended up choosing to spend the first 2 years of university in France, right? This is a bit of Clayton lore. I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast yet, but I spent the first 2 years of university in France. And by that time, right, like my parents had given me enough independence. I'd had enough of these opportunities to form my own problem solving skills that I was able to handle renting an apartment on my own in a foreign country, handle applying for my first job without their input at all, right? Handle managing the visa process in France without any of their input, right? And all of this I was able to do. I was able to plan my own wedding at age 25 and 26 while only needing a month of coordinator, right? Like, long story short, I feel like I have really been able to determine my own path in life. And the fact that my parents gave me the opportunities to do that at a very young age, I think is just part and parcel of that ability that I had. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. I think that ability to kind of scaffold, to use a term from pedagogy that I think we were probably taught at some point, the ability to sort of scaffold those skills to get you to a point where you can do those things. None of that happens if you are running behind a child and insisting on doing it for the child or giving the child the impression that they don't know how to do it for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the figure skating example in my childhood is a good example of like, I was not good, but I kept doing it and I learned, to handle disappointment and also to be really persistent. I also think that my parents also gave me the opportunity to really choose what I was passionate about and choose what I cared about. I think my mother in particular really would have preferred that I went into some sort of STEM fields. Just because women are kind of underrepresented. And at that point, in the 90s and early 2000s, it looked like that was like the place that our economy was going. But when I in high school said, I really like politics, I want to quit my summer job at the zoo and work on the Kerry campaign. And she's like, yeah, okay, whatever. And if you have a plan and you know how you want to get that done, go for it. So it was great. I think my parents were very safety conscious, like physical safety.
Sure.
But other than that, having the ability to kind of self-direct is an invaluable part of learning to be an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about time for us to take a break here. I think there's more stories we could share, more examples we could come up with, but let's take that break. We'll come back. We'll talk about a few more examples, and then we'll talk maybe a little bit about what we should do instead of this helicopter parenting. All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition. When we left off, we were talking about sort of our own sort of personal examples, our personal histories with our parents really not being helicopter parents. But I think there might be like a couple of additional examples we could bring in here that might help people sort of understand a little bit more what we're talking about. An example that's, again, sort of an anecdote here.
All of this has an end of two, gang.
Yeah. Well, an anecdote of my personal experience, but based on sort of my peers' experience in college. Like I already mentioned, as I said, that I spent the first 2 years of college in France, and I met a number of lifelong friends from all around the world there, right? But basically every single one of the people who I met there, like all of the students who had self-selected into that program, had the same sort of like independent streak that I had. That was like sort of I don't want to call it necessary, right? But like certainly it was selected for in the program, right? And basically all of them have told me that they have not incredibly overbearing parents, right? And nearly all of those friends who I made are doing pretty cool shit now and like largely have their lives figured out, right? Or like to provide another example, right? Maybe of just how independent we are and how maybe you should take a little bit of what we're saying with a grain of salt. I remember asking my mom when my sister was applying to college 2 years after I left home, how she was going to handle being on her own, because she was like never quite as independent as I was growing up. Sort of, I guess, to give you guys a little bit of the perspective of like the same parents can raise two different children, right? And so this, again, N of two, not gonna be all one thing for everyone. But I remember asking them how she was going to handle being at college on her own, because I was there at college and all of my friends were seemingly just as independent as I was. I thought this was just how people who were 18 and 19 were, right? And my mom basically replied to me that I needed to realize that I had voluntarily chosen to go to college with perhaps the most independent 18-year-olds on the entire planet. And so, of course, in the end, my sister has turned out just fine, because she is much more self-sufficient than many, and we do have the same parents after all. But I think that little story is sort of always stuck with me as to like how even these different degrees of resilience and independence can matter to people.
I think that's a great point. And again, you know, we are judging others on the basis of what we are used to and on the basis of who we are. And I think your experience really, really speaks to that you were viewing that sort of hyper independence that you were experiencing in your peer group as being the norm. But you're identifying the commonalities that your peers had, which was all the same or a very, very similar childhood. I've talked to my parents a number of times about their childhoods versus how they chose to bring me up. And, you know, I think a lot of the things that they experienced, they would not have countenanced for me because they perceived it as unsafe, like being physically unsafe. I'd honestly never really thought about this before until we were discussing this episode. My dad has spent some of his teenage years in London, and he talked about, me and my sister got transit passes, whatever the transit pass was in London in the 70s. And we just bopped around on public transportation all summer, no big deal. And I'm like, God, you would never let me do that. I mean, without a cell phone, because it was the 70s, I can't imagine, there was a certain level of anxiety about me moving to London when I was 20. But then again, when my dad was bopping around London, he wasn't a terrorist attack. So I feel like that probably is earning
that might have influenced him just a little bit.
The anxiety. Yes, exactly. There may have been.
This is phenomenal Megan lore.
Yeah.
What did you talk to your parents about this episode?
Not after I had that realization. I did speak to them about this episode, and my mom was very defensive isn't the right word, because I think it's justified. She was explaining her level of concern about, us getting next to a busy street or whatever. Like, that's legit. But I think something that they mentioned that we will be coming back to. My dad specifically mentioned, and again, this is a difference in his experience being a child versus parenting. Gun culture in the U.S. contributed to his sense of safety versus a lack of sense of safety for me and my brother. And they also mentioned that it's much easier to free range parent or be comfortable with your kids having less structured time when you have a neighborhood or a community where you know there are adults at home. And
again, another throwback to our very last episode.
Yes, exactly. If you have adults in the community who you consider to be responsible, then you are less concerned. And that very much speaks to my grandparents. My mom's parents lived next door to us. We had a great big shared yard. And that was the place that my parents were comfortable with my brother and I playing. And they really didn't want us leaving that space until we were quite a bit older, probably late middle school, early high school. So, that's what their perspective was on what was a safe space. And it was very much bounded by where are there adults that we know will have an eye out the window.
Sure. Well, I guess with that example, perhaps now is a good time for us to turn to some of the behaviors that we should quote unquote return to, right? Parenting behaviors that parents should try to emulate, and maybe a couple that they should be sort of consciously trying to adopt. I think the biggest one that we've talked about this sort of throughout the episode is just giving children age-appropriate space over time, right? I think that a lot of times what happens is the kind of like appropriate helicopteriness that exists for young children just gets carried over into later life, right? Like little children are just like, quite frankly, dummies, right? Because of like brain development and everything.
Just zero self-preservation skills.
Like, my mom tells a story about a time when I was like 1 or 2 or something. I managed to get a hold of a bottle of baby powder and just totally paint the room with it, basically. They left me unattended for like 30 minutes, right?
You don't even need to be unattended. I almost took a header out of a horse-drawn carriage when I was probably 3.
I was left alone for a very short period of time in my crib, mind you, and I still managed to get a hold of this baby powder. So like for young children, absolutely, totally understand.
Full supervision. Right? Don't make your 3-year-old call to order your takeout. I know you don't want to.
Yeah. But over time, parents need to give kids more space and opportunities and independence to grow into adults. The second is, instead of making decisions for your children, help them to make their own decisions, right? Offering children choices and guiding them when they ask for support can help show that you're always there for them. It can help them avoid making like truly catastrophic choices, right? That will actually end up harming them down the line. But it will offer them the opportunity to develop these decision-making skills and allow them to take ownership of their own choices.
Absolutely.
Right?
I would add to this as kind of like a 2.5, a 2.5 here, letting children experience the consequences of making the wrong decision.
Yes, people need to learn that it is okay to make mistakes, right?
I mean, not even just that it's okay, that like giving them more information by saying, you forget to pack something on a trip or whatever, your 12-year-old forgets to pack flip-flops. All right, you have to wear wet socks and shoes home from the beach.
Yeah.
The next time you'll remember.
Absolutely sucks. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's that 2.5. Absolutely, really good one. 3 then, I guess, or maybe 3.5. We can say, since that one sort of bridged a couple of these ones, is instead of handling their problems for them, to go with our wet socks example, give them the tools to handle those problems on their own. Right. You're not going to go and buy a new pair of socks in the middle of your vacation, in the middle of your day, right? But you can help them figure out how to handle that problem, right? How they should actually make it so that doesn't totally suck for them for the entire rest of the day, right? Especially when it comes to that kind of minor problem, right? It is better to let children attempt to handle the problem on their own before stepping in and like jumping in ahead of them from the get-go, right? This helps sort of deepen those problem-solving skills that we've been talking about, build tolerance to frustration, and as an added benefit, it means that you don't actually need to solve all of their problems, and it means that you aren't still scheduling doctor's appointments for them in their early 20s.
Yep.
And then last but not least is to give them age-appropriate responsibilities, right? They should have things that are their job, that they are responsible for. Helicopter parents tend to do everything for their kid at every age, even things that their kids should be doing on their own by a certain time, like cleaning the room, doing their laundry, packing their own lunches, all of that, right? And helping hold your child responsible for certain tasks and chores can help to build that sort of independence, right? And this is the kind of thing that used to be extremely common, right? Like your eldest son or something would be responsible for taking out the garbage every week.
Mowing the lawn.
Mowing the lawn. And in many ways, I think that this is still true of eldest daughters, right? Eldest daughters get a ton of responsibilities and way more than age-appropriate responsibilities, right?
In many families, that's true. And in many families, like just interacting in my parents' extended network, I've brought this up on group vacations. Like, I feel like the expectations of me as the only daughter may be a little bit different than the expectations are for the boys. You know, the girls are the ones helping with the dishes often for that sort of function, and maybe that's not expected of the boys.
Yeah. And this sort of like broader helicopter parenting of all of the other children results in maybe too much independence given to eldest daughters at this point.
Which creates its own problems.
Which creates its own problems down the line. Absolutely. And oftentimes, a lot of those eldest daughters who have this too much responsibility foisted upon them, then turn into helicopter parents because they are reacting against the exact kind of problems that they faced as young children.
Or they have had put on them the sense that they are responsible for solving the problems of others.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is something that happens to a lot of my sisters.
Yeah. But the bottom line here is that as children get older, right, parents should allow their children to succeed or fail on their own, especially when it comes to things with low stakes. Give children the opportunity to take more responsibility and gain more independence as they age. Provide guidance rather than direction for things that are sort of higher stakes or more in danger. And
I would add to that, and this is more of an inoculation against the over-directing parenting style. A child may not be solving the problem in the way the parent wants, but the child is solving the problem. If the lesson the child learns is that it's not important that the problem gets solved, it's important that the problem gets solved in the way mom or dad wanted, that creates the same difficulties down the road as if they were being told that they were not capable of solving problems.
Yes, exactly. And this goes back to the stuff we were talking about 30 minutes ago of children sort of doubting their own competencies, right? Doubting their own abilities. I think maybe to provide another sort of personal example here, like tied into this idea of maybe you're not doing it the best way or the way your parents would want you to. When I was like 10 or 11 or so, my mom basically told me that she was no longer gonna clean my room for me or do my laundry, right? I immediately learned what I was supposed to do and not supposed to do with regard to laundry. But for cleaning my room, I was not so great at it for a number of years. I have a little comic strip that my dad taped to my door that is still there. Or I don't know if it's actually still there because my parents are moving to Sacramento this week and they may have already taken it off. But it's from... what's the name of the comic strip with Jeremy and his dad? Zitz. It's from Zitz. It's Jeremy's dad going into Jeremy's room. The teenager is Jeremy, and it's a pigsty in there. And Jeremy is drawn as this big human-sized pig, right? And it's a pigsty. This was my room for a long time, right? But now, many years later, since I still had to figure out how to clean my room when it came time to really get down to it, right? I am now, like, I think relatively fastidious, right? I prefer things to be clean, and I am the one in my household basically who does all of the cleaning, all of the cooking, all of the dishwashing, all of the taking of the trash out and everything.
Fuck those gender norms.
Because I need to now, right? Like it's sort of it's a thing that I need to do. Or I guess to provide another personal example, or maybe Megan, do you have any personal examples you would like to jump in with here? I've been monologuing at these people for a while.
I'm trying to think of, I also had that experience of, well, it's time for you to do your laundry about at that age. I also kind of learned the hard way that if I let the clothes sit in the hamper for too long, they're going to smell funky.
It's not a great idea.
It's not a great idea. Middle school age children of any gender presentation don't smell great. So,
What?
Boys have Axe and girls have, I think it was the Body Shop.
This is the first time you're telling me this, Megan. This is a bad Trump impression. Sorry.
No.
The first time I'm ever hearing this. You've never told me this before. It's brand new information.
That's a really, really bad Trump impression. Oh my God.
I promise my other accent work is better.
Okay,
Trump is just a particular...
Again, something for the bonus content, maybe. So I think that's probably the best one of those. But I also definitely I learned how to cook probably in high school. My dad would be on business trips a week a month at that point in my life. And my mom didn't particularly enjoy cooking either. And so one day of that week every month, I would make dinner. And, that gets you kind of used to. I usually made a slight variation on the same thing. But it meant that she didn't have to do it. And it meant there's one thing that I learned how to cook really, really well. It's very similar.
It might mean that one dish a week for the first few years is worse than everything else, right? That your family might make. But in the end, it turns out to be beneficial. But
absolutely.
I had the same sort of experience. Like my parents asked me to cook dinner one day a week, and I did so. And now I own like a dozen cookbooks, and I genuinely take pride in my ability to feed people, and I genuinely enjoy cooking. So yeah.
I would also add, I think I got responsible for fixing things.
Okay.
Fairly young. My grandfather was a kind of a handyman for fun. Like he fixed things around the homes of his friends and around my home since they lived next door. And when I moved into my own apartment when I was in law school, he gave me a toolbox that I still have and said, you should be able to fix any minor problem. Between this and, whatever you can find on the internet. And if you can't figure it out, call me. And from there, I'm able to resolve, and you can learn anything on YouTube, but I am confident in my ability to fix most minor problems. I don't do electrical. I don't really do plumbing. Electrical is the one that can kill you, so call an expert.
Electrical is the one that can kill you. Definitely don't do your own wiring. And plumbing is also sort of that same level of seriousness.
Exactly. So that's probably the other place where somebody made me feel like I can figure this out. I have the ability. And that's the key. I have the tools. I have the ability. I can figure it out. Instilling in a child the confidence that they can resolve the problem to a certain point is probably the most important thing that a parent can do, avoiding these sorts of helicopter-like tendencies, in my opinion.
I think that's probably a good time for us to take another little break. We'll come back with a bit of just a summary, right, of what we've talked about, the ways that we think we should go forward, and just sort of how this connects sort of broadly to the theme of the podcast. How are we actually rejecting modernity and embracing tradition here, rather than just telling people, don't be helicopter parents? All right, welcome back for the last segment here. This one will be a lot shorter. We're just going to sort of sum up everything we've talked about. I think if there's sort of one metaphor that might help people here and it helped me when I was sort of thinking about how to frame this episode, is that if we think of childhood and eventual independence in adulthood as sort of successfully walking a tightrope, then parents should first teach their children how to walk it, then allow them to walk it on their own instead of continuing to hold on until you have to let go and there's no safety net, right? And that includes letting them fall, but always being the net that catches them while they are still living with you, while they're still under your roof, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know that it was hard for my parents to sort of like watch me fall, so to speak, when I did something dumb, when I came to them crying, but over the
figure
years,
skating, I was literally falling.
You were literally falling. And like, I don't know if you guys haven't ever been ice skating. Falling on the ice is painful. Like, the ice itself, like, feels sharp. It's like, it sucks. It's not fun. Not fun. So it must have taken a lot of fortitude for your parents there, Megan.
Yeah. Ironically, like, they can tell you the taxonomy of how bad a fall is just looking at it. If you slide, you're fine. If you don't slide, physics is not your friend.
Yeah. Physics is not, it's good. But like, slowly and surely, like, even as we are afraid of falling as children, right? Afraid of doing all these dumb things, right? Slowly and surely, that fear subsides, the sort of the wobbly knees go away, and you begin to walk straighter, you begin to walk with confidence, you begin to develop a sense of self and become a young adult, right? Which is really sort of what the end result, the end goal should be. Because at a certain point, you can no longer parent your kids, right? Like, at a certain point, they are their own person. And even if you're there to provide the steady elder statesman parenting hand, all of that kind of thing, it's not the same thing. Right. And so the goal of parenting, at least in my view, as someone, I guess, who doesn't have kids but wants them, is to develop adults, right? Develop young adults in such a way that they can be adults on their own.
With a good sense of independence and a good sense of right versus wrong and what path they should take in different circumstances. Yeah.
And I think that the way that this connects back to the broader themes here is that this sort of societal expectation, right, even to be a helicopter parent, to protect your child from all dangers, right? That anything your child experiences that is scary, that is a problem, that anytime they fail as a kid is a failure of yours as a parent, right? And is an abject failure with no redeeming qualities, no long-term benefits.
There is no benefit to it,
Yeah, there is this societal expectation for us to treat children in this way.
Absolutely. Right? If I can jump in with just a quick example from my own experience as you kind of bring this home. I was partners with a person with a child for 4 years, with a child who was still living at home. And during the COVID homeschooling time, his son did not bring home a certain piece of paper that he needed in order to complete a lesson. And my partner was falling all over himself to try and get that supply so his child could complete the homework on time. And I said, hey man, your child is 11 years old. Your child can be responsible for this, in my opinion, and should probably understand that there are consequences for not being organized in this way. And his approach to it, and of course I was completely deferential because I am not this child's parent. In this situation, he was concerned about appearing to be very specifically a deadbeat dad for not resolving this problem instantaneously. And if we're conflating letting children experience non-harmful consequences with being a bad parent, it's going to be difficult for them to learn what consequences are.
And I think that this speaks to just the broader trend over the last several decades, perhaps, of continuing to infantilize young people, right? Treating them as if they do not have goals and hopes and skills of their own, right? As just the population of the United States ages more generally, right? This might be sort of a broader population level trend. But treating kids as though they cannot be independent. Right. And I think that is sort of the crux. That is, like, to me, the fundamental piece here of why this is rejecting modernity, embracing tradition. It's not just rejecting these more modern, more common parenting styles. It's rejecting the societal expectation that you treat your children this way, that you don't give them independence, that giving them independence is bad and harmful and dangerous. And if you do so, you are a bad parent. Mm-hmm. I think that is sort of the main thing that we want to get across here. And I know it's taken us 45 minutes to do it. But
there's a lot of stories in here. There
were a lot of stories in here. Yeah, there was a lot of examples. And y'all could have skipped to the end if you wanted the main point.
1.5 speed is fine, man. It's okay.
But the broad point here really is this societal expectation. This is what we want to hammer home. We want you to understand, if you have children, or if you're thinking of having children, if you know you want children, right? That this expectation is a modern one. That in order to be a good parent, you have to do these things. You have to remove these obstacles out of your child's path, or you are a bad parent. That is a modern notion. And it is one that in the end ends up harming kids rather than it helps them. And so as you go forward, being a parent, potentially being a parent, wanting to be a parent.
Or just not judging parents.
Indeed. If you don't have kids at all, right? Just being a part of the village that it takes to raise a child, mm-hmm. right? As we think about that, as you leave this episode and go forward, that is what we want you to remember. And to sum it up in a phrase, mm-hmm. it's about rejecting helicopter parenting and embracing adolescent independence. But until next time, I'm Clayton Becker.
And I'm Megan Cox.
And we will see you in the next one.